Okay, so we are live. Watch for people to come in. We'll go ahead and launch the poll. So you guys should be seeing the poll. Um, Welcome. If you're just joining us, we're just kind of hanging out. So you're just dancing around with the.
Yeah, do you want me to go to the first
Yeah,
one?
go to the webinar will begin one. Yeah. So if you're just joining us, Julian and Lorenzo and I are just hanging out. Take the survey. We got where on the AI ML journey is your team today? Let us know if you're just getting started. Like, this might be the first webinar you're attending, learning about this stuff. That's cool. So let us know if you're just getting started, or maybe you've got some conversations going internally. Maybe you got a few projects you're rolling into already. So yeah, take the poll as you're coming in, and then in the chat, let us know where you're coming in from. It's always fun to know where people are coming in. So guys, we were talking before DALL-E 2. So Julian, you said you have tested. If you just joining us and
Yeah,
not familiar, DALL-E 2 is an image generation technology from
yeah, I was gonna
OpenAI.
say, I don't know if everybody knows what
Yeah.
DALL-E is, but it sort of has this weird name, right? Because it's almost like a painter. So it's this AI-based painter where it's fed a bunch of images and it has a bunch of different concepts around like people, backgrounds, objects, and all these things. And so what it does, it turns any sentence that you could give it into an image, right? And usually, right, you can pick the set of images. And so you can use a free tool, which is online, but it's usually like overloaded because there's too many people trying to use the server. Or you can try to set it up yourself, which is what I was doing last week. And that is the fun part of actually getting to play with some of the stuff. So the story I was telling Paul is that Snowflake had a bunch of announcements around data science and machine learning last week. So I thought, what a better way to sort of like talk about those announcements and try to create a picture using DALL-E. So there was like this new type of data that we announced. There's this like new language support for Python and like this other stuff that we had. And so I created a very like 5-word short sentence to get a picture. Of course, it wasn't what I expected it to be, but if you think about it, so in some way it was like iceberg data, which hopefully nobody, not expecting anybody to know what that is. It was iceberg data plus Python plus some other stuff. It one that ended up doing was it created a green iceberg. So it turned like the Python, I guess, into green. And so I thought that was the cool thing that I was able to do.
That's pretty cool. I was so again, if you're just joining us, take the survey we've got up. We're just talking a little bit about image generation while we're hanging out because Julian was testing DALL-E Mini. Now, is that from OpenAI also, or is that from a different?
Yeah,
It
it's
is
also
OpenAI.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I got access. DALL-E 2 was announced April 6th of this year. I signed up for the access like the next day, and I did finally get it last Wednesday. So I got to play around with the real thing, and it's wild. Like in the app, I don't know if Mini works the same way, but I was just on my phone. You just put the text prompt in, and in under 10 seconds, it will create 6 original images in whatever form you want: 3D render, photorealistic. I did kids playing baseball on a hot day, chalk drawing, it drew kids. I mean, it's wild. And so, like, as a marketer, you start to just like your mind wants to explode with all the ways you could envision doing this, from like logo design to replacing the need for stock photography to, you say, like illustrations of announce. I mean, it's just almost limitless what it could do. It's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, and there's if anybody doesn't want to like actually get too much into it, but wants to have a little bit of fun with it, there's a Twitter account. I think it's called Weird DALL-E Generations. And so there's this like all these prompts with like funny pictures. I think the other one the other day I saw was like Darth Vader mowing the lawn. And so it was Darth Vader with like the lightsaber cutting grass. And there were like all these images around that. So it's pretty fun.
The first one I created, I shared this on LinkedIn. So if you're connected to me on LinkedIn, you could look at from the last few days. I shared some, like I think 5 of the ones I generated. But one of the first one I did was I happened to be drinking a glass of scotch when I got the access. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And I did an artificial intelligence writing a blog post while drinking a glass of scotch, photorealistic. And that was like my first generated image. And sure enough, it's like a robot sitting there at a desk, like writing. Showed it to my daughter who's 10. She's an aspiring artist. And I said, just give me a prompt. She goes, a fat, fluffy unicorn dancing on rainbows. And so that was the first image my daughter generated. Now, interestingly enough, my daughter was not a fan because I think she was a little distraught that this thing could create, which was interesting because I was anxious to see her reaction. Probably a whole nother webinar topic of the impact this technology is going to have on people at different ages. But man, it is pretty fascinating stuff. And again, so if you're just joining us, we were just kind of hanging out, talking a little bit beforehand. We've got the poll going up. I see people taking it. We have a lot of people at the just getting started understanding AI ML phase. I'll show that in a second. So again, we're going to get started here in about 30 seconds. We'll give people a few more moments to join in the chat. Kathy on my team is with us, Kathy McPhillips. So if you need anything, Kathy will be there to help you out. Don't hesitate to reach out to her. We'll also, if you want to throw in the chat where you're zooming in from, it's always fun to see where people are coming in from. And then, so we'll take the poll. All right, we'll take a minute past. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And let's go ahead and get this thing started. All right, Lorenzo, take us. How AI unlocks value from your single source of data truth. That is what we are here to talk about today. I am Paul Raitzer, founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute. I'm recognizing some of the names on the attendee list. So I know there's some people that know who I am. If this is your first time with us, welcome. So I'll be here just kind of moderating to start, and then I'll be back at the end for Q&A. I'm joined today by Lorenzo Mello, product marketing at Snowflake, and Julian Ferrero, also product marketing at Snowflake. Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
Great to be here today. Thanks, Paul.
Absolutely. So just a quick note, we went through this 2 weeks ago together, and I will tell you right now, I'm going to go ahead and share the results as I'm talking, because what you'll see, guys, is we have 100% the just getting started understanding. And what I will tell you was it's a wildly educational and approachable deck that we're about to go through from these guys. They did a great job kind of putting this together in a very understandable framework. I learned a ton in the preview. And so I can tell you, I'm anxious for you all to also go through this. So just a quick note on the Institute. We are basically a media and event and education company is primarily what we do. And we're under the working assumption that within 3 to 5 years, at least 80% of what marketers do every day will be intelligently automated to some degree, meaning AI is going to be infused into the tools, the technologies that we are using to do our jobs. It's not going to do our jobs for us, but is going to be an assistant and augment what we're capable of doing. And at the core of that is data. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So our mission as the Marketing AI Institute is to make this stuff approachable and actionable to you. And Lorenzo, you can go ahead and take us ahead. So we do that in very simple ways through education. And one of the ways is this monthly webinar series. And so the webinars are a way for us to bring thought leaders together from the industry, give you very easily approachable topics. And if you want to jump ahead, Lorenzo, there's a URL you can go to here where we archive all of these. We have a couple dozen probably there at any point you can access them. They are available on demand after the fact. So we'll send out, we always get the question, is it going to be available? Yes. We will send out an email probably tomorrow from Kathy on our team. You'll get access to the on-demand video of this. And then the last thing I'll say on my end is we do have a conference coming up. So the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Conference is back in person for the first time since 2019. So if you're looking to get back with other humans, I know I am desperately, we will be at the Cleveland Convention Center right by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right overlooking Lake Erie. It's a beautiful location. So we'll be back there again this year, and we'd love to have you join us there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lorenzo and Julian and let them do their thing. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A throughout. I'll be watching for those as well as the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to drop off a video, and it's all yours, guys.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Really excited to be here with everybody today. We'll start with the agenda really quickly. So we've split this out into kind of 3 chapters. And as Paul said, please do ask some questions. We have some time at the end for Q&A. The first chapter I'll cover, which is around kind of building that foundation, that single source of truth of unifying all of your data. Then I'll hand it off to Julian, who's our AI expert. We'll talk about how you can take that single source of truth and then unlock value from it with AI. And then Julian and I will split talking about a couple customers and logos that have leveraged the data cloud. So Snowflake, to deploy AI for marketing use cases specifically. And then, as we stated at the end, we'll hopefully have some time at the end for Q&A, and we'll have a discussion on this as well. So again, looking forward to this opportunity. And I think, as marketers, I think maybe the most logical place to start is with the customer, and a couple of things that are happening today in the market. And the first one here on the left is fairly intuitive for all of us, because at the end of the day, we're all consumers ourselves. And that is that there's kind of a collective demand for more improved and personalized experiences. Like, we all demand more and expect more from how companies engage with that. And there are, more channels available. There's more tools available. There's applications everywhere across different platforms, more ways for companies to reach us as consumers. And that has kind of really saturated the market and made the competition for our attention and our eyeballs, so to speak, really challenging for marketers. So I think this is something we can all relate to in our everyday lives, and how much content and ads we consume every day, just really across multiple platforms, mobile, TV, and really all of the different channels that exist. So a couple stats to back this up. These are from McKinsey. 71% of consumers expect the personalized experience, and 76% actually get frustrated when they can't find that personalized experience. So this not only tells you that it's becoming an expectation, but that brands that aren't able to deliver on that improved customer experience actually really suffer from this, and have challenges not only reaching customers and prospects with relevant campaigns, but it might actually hurt them in terms of their retention strategies. And then, to compound that, moving over to the right side of the slide, is the fact that marketing budgets have been stagnated. And so the percentages you see here in the middle of the bars are the percentage representation of marketing budgets as a slice of company revenue. And sure, you can see that there was an increase from 2021. This was the lowest representation of marketing spend in total company budgets ever. So a little bit of an outlier, but it still appears stagnated when compared to the pre-pandemic values, right? You see that 11% 2020 going down to 9.5% in 2022. And this is relevant because it honestly adds more urgency, I think, to generate new efficiencies for marketers. So in essence, if growth isn't coming from increased budgets, then it has to come from somewhere else. And that somewhere else is through increased efficiencies and really higher effectiveness in marketing. So the path forward to gaining these new efficiencies and for driving deeper levels of personalizations, it starts with a robust data strategy. Paul kind of touched on it in his intro, something we call data-driven marketing. We, and really the industry, refers to as data-driven marketing, that can be ultimately kind of optimized and ultimately automated using AI and machine learning to really scale out those marketing use cases that move the needle for businesses. And so one of the things I like to do when we talk about data-driven marketing, we hear that term a lot. It's become interchangeable with the new era of modern marketing and where the function's headed. But at the same time, I think because it's sometimes overused, it's also become somewhat of a catchphrase that I think is important to explicitly tie back to what marketers and businesses really care about and what they're trying to achieve. So I think it's also important to know that at the end of the day, when we refer to the marketing persona, it's important to highlight that this is one of the most data-driven personas in an organization today. And it has been one for quite some time. Marketers have understood the relevance of data and have been dependent on data for quite some time. And so this is what you see here is a plain view, but one that I think is helpful to kind of re-anchor everyone on some of the really tangible and concrete things that marketers are aiming to achieve, or in many cases achieving with data-driven marketing today. It's essentially a means to an end for marketers to do things like, getting deeper customer insights from their data. So leveraging BI and analytics tools for insights and visualization. Again, ultimately combining that with machine learning and AI to deliver those most relevant and timely campaigns. In the middle there, getting timely measurement on how to evaluate the impact of their campaigns and marketing spend. Marketing spend is one of the most inefficient slices of the budget. I think it's an estimated 30 or 40%. Optimistically, I think, of marketing budgets are going to waste due to kind of reduced effectiveness and honestly, that lack of measurability at points. So measurement and visibility into the effectiveness of your campaigns obviously becomes critical. And then on the right side, marketers are effectively looking to activate their marketing data to power segmentation models and recommendation engines. And this is, again, as a means to an end to improve the timing and impact of customer engagement. So, these are just some of the things that marketers are trying to do and are doing today with data as the foundational centerpiece of their marketing strategies. And there are many, many more, obviously, examples of what you see here, but these three I thought it'd be important to call out. Let me go forward here. The reality is, and this is supposed to be difficult to look at. The reality is that doing these things can be really complex, right? And nearly impossible if you have the wrong technology foundation. And the fundamental reason why that's becoming increasingly hard to accomplish is really the explosion of data, which in turn is generating an explosion of data silos, right? So this graphic that you see here, which many of you may be familiar with, I think provides a good representation of the breadth of options that exist today in MarTech and really the fragmentation that currently exists in the space. And so in more detail, this is a graphic from the marketing technology landscape or from Chief MarTech, which they update on an annual basis. And this one, I think, is just from a couple months ago. And you can see each of these dots. Well, I don't know if you can see by design, maybe shouldn't be able to see them, but the dots that you see on the screen, each individual dot is an individual tool, right? It's an individual technology or application that is available today as a potential tool in your MarTech stack. And so there's really no need to go into depth of why this is so challenging to navigate. In 2011, there was 150 logos as part of this study. And 11 years later, in 2022, we're looking at around 10,000. So that's just an unprecedented growth in the ecosystem. And then on one hand, it shows kind of that deep fragmentation and complexity that marketers have to navigate today. But on the other hand, it also shows the incredible innovation that has existed in the field. But ultimately, each of these applications is generating new data that needs to be stitched together in order for marketers to deliver that consistent experiences that we discussed that customers expect. It outshowed this. There was a stat that I saw from one of our partners, Fivetrend, that stated that on average, I saw Paul put it in the chat, an organization uses 110 SaaS apps. So that's a pretty amazing stat that really stuck with me. It shows you how complex it is to really bring all of that data together. And really, in a world prior to Snowflake, right, having to bring all of your customer data together was and continues to be, if you don't have a tool like the Snowflake Data Cloud, a really difficult and cumbersome task, right? The consequence of this is that critical data about customers, it sits in various data silos. It may live in CRM, could be your inventory data, your point of sales data, could be service data, product data, ERP. And this fragmentation of customer data within an organization makes it, again, really, really difficult to have a single view of all your customer data, which we commonly refer to and is commonly referred to in the market as customer 360. And that's the foundation in data-driven marketing. You have to start by unifying all your data, all your customer data, particularly into one place. And the impact of that is really, if you don't have a tool that facilitates this for you and that is capable of taking all these data sources in, it becomes a really heavy lift for your engineering resources to have to bring all those data sources together and stitch them manually into a single location, right? And then also maintain that data as it evolves. You can just imagine how complex, how expensive, time consuming, how daunting that task really can be for organizations. And so the goal is for organizations to do the exact opposite of that, right? It's to build that customer 360 view or this complete unification and integration of customer data, where all the data sits together in a single source. It's made readily available and accessible to all of your teams. So everybody's querying from the same source. Now, one key word here that is on the title is enterprise-wide data strategy, which spans beyond just the customer data and into things that impact customer experience. And I'll get to that and I'll hold that thought, get to that in that nuance in just a few slides. But in short, the high-level message here is data silos are making it extremely challenging for organizations to adopt that single view of the customer and therefore truly deliver on that potential of those data-driven marketing outcomes that really drive the business forward that we discussed earlier. And so that's where Snowflake comes in, right? And that's where there's a unique value proposition that the Data Cloud offers to address these challenges. And I'll take a few minutes here to introduce Snowflake and the Data Cloud. At the highest level, that the mission is exactly that, right? It's allowing organizations to break down those data silos and enable marketers and many of the other internal teams any persona across the enterprise to tap into that enterprise level single source of truth. And, there are three pillars that I think are worth mentioning that help paint a more vivid picture of the data cloud and how it can help marketers uniquely. So starting with the one on the left here, the first one, this is what we've been driving home, right? It's that Snowflake is one platform for all your data. So that kind of single source of truth for your enterprise data. That means you can use sources, whether they be internal sources or external sources, first party, second party, or third party sources, even different formats of data, whether it be structured data, semi-structured data, or unstructured data, or it could really be streamed, batch, or shared data. Snowflake takes all of that in and unifies all of that data in a simple way. You don't need to have specific data marts, data lakes, specific things that are separate from the data cloud because it all lives in one single source, right? The second pillar that you see in the middle here is about instant governed access, right? And what that means is that you can work with fresh data to reduce data latency, with data sharing it instant access to data as it's updated. So I think to provide something that many of us have probably experienced is the scenario where we have an ad shown to us for something that we've already purchased, right? That's a perfect example of data latency, where the systems in the back aren't updated instantly and it's different sources, and one of them's been updated, but the other one hasn't. So we're getting ads for something, for the pair of shoes that I just bought a couple of weeks ago. That's an example that is removed when you work with the data cloud. And then critically, I think still in the middle pillar here, important to mention privacy, which I think is top of mind for all of us marketers, particularly with the recent and upcoming regulatory changes. With the data cloud, if you think about it, just the simple fact that you're storing all your data in a single place, by definition, it means that there are less copies of personal identifiable information sitting in different data silos. And so, again, by definition, you have less surface vulnerabilities and greater control and security and higher privacy of those data sets. And then lastly, on the right side, the seamless activation pillar. You can collaborate by enabling activation analytics platforms to access the data. It's elastic. So think of that in a sense that you can scale up or down to meet the needs of your peak intervals, whatever they are, and really only pay for what you use. And then lastly, we depend on our ecosystem to make marketing use cases come to life, right? And with Snowflake, you can seamlessly integrate with the best of breed engagement engines, marketing clouds, great partners across data integration, data modeling and transformation, data enrichment, identity partners that are natively built in the data cloud, so you don't have to move your data from the data cloud to the application, activation engines, and obviously some of the AI data science partners as well that are able to take this to the next level. And so I won't cover as part of this slide the data science, the value prop and capabilities in depth. Julian will cover the data science and AI piece in just a few minutes. But this, I think, provides kind of a high level overview of what the data cloud is. But from a more kind of, I think, a more friendly slide, right? A little bit more of a visual standpoint. I like to show this slide since it covers kind of the full workload portfolio of the data cloud. And it includes things like the collaboration workload applications or data science, and even the new ones that were announced, new workloads like cybersecurity and Unistore that were announced last week. So I think this one provides a little bit more of a visual representation of what we just covered. But in a nutshell, on the left side, you see the data cloud enables all these different data sources of customer data. So the ERP, CRMs, website data, product data, social media, and really any others as we just covered. The data cloud enables the storage of that data in a single location. And so whatever use case your teams are looking to tackle, right, they're all tapping into that same source of enterprise data to drive towards those business outcomes that marketers pursue and that really any of your internal teams can work with. And so as I mentioned earlier, the emphasis on enterprise data, I said I would come back to that as opposed to just customer data. If you're unable to adopt a broad view just beyond marketing data, it can actually become a limiting factor that blocks in data fragmentation. So for instance, if you have inventory data tied to your marketing data, you can then begin to push out products that you may have a surplus of, right? And on the contrary, there's a contrary scenario there, which is if you don't have anything in stock, you can avoid wasting money on advertising for products that are no longer on the shelf or no longer available. And so by having that enterprise-wide view, as opposed to just a slice of the data, you're really able to get that full view of your business and get to more advanced marketing use cases that depend on that cross-functional data. And then on the right side there, in terms of driving campaigns that are personalized to your audiences, there are a number of activation platforms that Snowflake can enable, which are represented by that purple box you see on the right part of the slide, connected to the various marketing channels that you work with, right? So that's where our CDP partners and some of our reverse ETL partners help really unlock the value of the data that exists in Snowflake today and really push out to whatever marketing channels you use. All right, but this is the slide that I'll kind of work into a little bit. The real power of Snowflake isn't limited to the first part of it. But I think the real magic, and we saw this last week at Summit where the theme was collaboration, it comes from the ability to seamlessly collaborate across your ecosystem in a completely seamless and privacy compliant way. So we'll break this down a little bit from a business lens. This means you can start by having access to all your organization's data, as we've just covered, right? That means eliminating those separate data platforms or any data marts that exist for separate departments, for separate subsidiaries, for separate geographies, use cases, teams. Eliminate all that. You harness all your data in one place. Beyond your four walls, though, you can have instant access to data from your suppliers to drive supply chain efficiency, right? Your partners, for example, to potentially do joint go-to-market campaigns, or your customers even to deliver exceptional experiences. So the ability to have that data without any movement while maintaining the highest level of privacy standards is really powerful and can generate tremendous value. And then lastly, right, the outer ring that you see here, the data cloud, gives you access to the Snowflake data marketplace. The marketplace. We changed the name last week to Snowflake Marketplace, where hundreds of companies offer their data or their data services, again, delivered without data ever changing hands. So think of data sets that can be used to enrich your own data, whether this be shopper data where you can query trends, or household data that helps your marketing campaigns, weather data, or really multiple kinds of anything that can really help extract the maximum value from your data by enriching it. And that's one of the true benefits of working with Snowflake in the data cloud, really is this full ecosystem that you can take advantage of, again, with secure and private data collaboration where data doesn't actually change hands. It all sits in the data cloud. And so I find this view interesting because I think it's helpful to understand how organizations are using Snowflake to deliver on the marketing outcomes. And this journey is one that we're seeing more and more from our customers as they become more data driven and evolve their marketing practice. Starting on the left side there, the customer 360, we covered this a bit at the top, but it refers against that step of organizations unifying all data into a single source and getting that full 360-degree view of the customer. And so again, this is a very critical foundational step that marketers must take, I think, to get a more holistic view and deep understanding of their customers. Moving on to number 2 there, from here, organizations are able to get much more detailed in their analysis and generate insights that offer visibility into what is working, right? And perhaps should be doubled down as an investment, as well as what is not working and needs to be adjusted to improve marketing ROI. And then the third element about activating data from that customer 360 base to execute those most relevant and highly targeted personalized campaigns, going back to those increasing demands that consumers have. And this, by definition, is increasing the effectiveness of your marketing execution and improving your customers' experiences. And it's also doing this all while simultaneously kind of increasing the efficiency of your marketing spend. And on the far right side, one of the core reasons why you're all here, right, the data science layer, this is where organizations want to get to, right? It's where the implementation of machine learning, AI, data science algorithms to automate and scale their marketing use cases across the organization. And Julian will go into more detail here in just a minute, but it's important to note that this is a process that, when shown on a slide like this, it may miss some of the iterations that are key to implementing it. In practice, it's actually much more fluid than this and requires some agility and the ability to make ongoing adjustments. It's not as linear and clean as we show it here. And in many cases, it's not as sequential as it's shown here either. So, for instance, you might evolve into steps 2 or 3 shown here, quickly realize that there are other data sets that should be flowing into your customer 360. So you'll iterate and adjust as you see fit to drive the most impact for your business. So I just have 2 quick slides left, and I'll hand it off to Julia. I'll be brief here on the AI opportunity marketing. Paul touched on it a little bit at the beginning. The bottom line is that marketers are starting to get more comfortable with data. And therefore, there's real potential in AI and machine learning. So a couple of stats here. AI usage in marketing is expected to triple over the next 3 years. And then during those 3 years, it's expected to nearly double in value that it brings to marketing and sales teams, right? And that's from $1.4 trillion to 2.6 trillion, which is kind of a mind-numbing number if you think about it. Um, and when we talk about some of those concrete things that marketers are aiming to do through data-driven marketing, that's what AI allows you to do, right? So it increases marketing ROI, it improves the personalization customer experience. AI helps with measurement and campaign effectiveness and kind of provides a path for that continuous improvement. And it enables new efficiencies by making your decisions, allowing you to make decisions in a faster and more streamlined way. It's, just to touch a little bit on tangible use cases that AI and machine learning can unlock. I won't drain this in detail, but you see across the bottom is personalization, right? Which is, it can be commonly referred to as a use case, but it can be achieved by more focused or granular implementations, such as what you see in the purple boxes. So, for example, if you can use AI to predict what customers will churn, you have an opportunity to deliver a more personal retention strategy for that particular customer. Similarly, if you're able to use machine learning to get deeper and more precise segmentation, you're probably on a good path to providing that deeper personalized experiences that your customers demand. So the way I look at this is, while personalization is kind of a hero use case and acts as an umbrella, almost like a North Star goal that companies really want to get to, it can be achieved in several different kind of more granular ways, such as what you see in the purple boxes. And there are countless AI use cases for marketing. The ones that here are likely straightforward ones that perhaps organizations are thinking about. But this, I think, provides a way to think about specific things that can be done to begin addressing a more personalized customer experience. But with that, I've spoken long enough, and I'd like to pass it off to my colleague, Julian Pereira, who will take over from here.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So I think to follow up on those things, right? I think the most important thing about machine learning and data science is the fact that you need data. And so by having it all in one place, really makes the whole data science process a lot easier, especially because you can do multiple use cases on the same data set. And so I'll explain a little bit this. But for those that are sort of new to data science and machine learning, I wanted you to walk through sort of like how a data scientist would think, or like how a data science process would work for one of these specific use cases, right? So if, for example, in your organization, the one thing you're most worried about right now, or you're most focused on right now, is reducing churn. And you want to have a predictive model that can help you with this. Well, what ends up happening is that you have to put the business context in a way that you could put into a machine learning model, which in this case, we could say like, hey, I want the machine learning model to predict if a customer is going to churn in the next 30 days, right? You sort of know from your business perspective that within 30 days, you can have enough action to drive change. And so you want the model to predict 30 days out, right? Maybe in your business, you can drive change within 10 days. And so then you would have the model predict within 10 days, right? So a lot of the business logic needs to go into this. But once you know your business objective, and then once you align that business objective with the model objective, then you go through a process where you take historical raw data. And so this could be anything that's coming from your organization. That could be first party, such as historical purchases, website activity, profile details, right? Like if I sign up to an account, all the details around that, even membership status, that could be an important flag. And then, of course, as Lorenzo mentioned, a cool thing about Snowflake is that you can bring a lot of what we call second party or shared data. So from business partners. So if you have an organization, you guys sell products together, they have some data, you have some data, you could bring that too. And same thing with third-party data. A lot of what we're seeing in retail is a lot of like location-based data around customer segments. And so we bring in that location data from third-party providers through the Snowflake marketplace and bring that to it. Okay, so now you have your raw data. The next thing that you need to do is transform data into features. And features is really just a representation that machine learning models need in order to understand the problem that they have at hand, right? If you just feed it raw purchases and transactions for every user across every location, the model is not really going to know how to take action on that. But if you give it a little bit of structure, then it's going to know exactly what it is. So something that you could do is say per each of my user IDs, which is the one thing that I have in common across all these data sets, or a certain number of data sets that I can merge, then the data scientist will go through the process of creating a bunch of features. And so here I have some examples of what those could be. So to predict churn, one of the things that could happen is, hey, I want to know the total of purchases that were made in the last 7 days. And this number could be 14 days, 30 days, right? Some of the things that happen during the model creation process is figuring out what are the best predictors or the best input data that you could have in order to predict the output that you're looking for. And so this could be all these different features that could be generated from your raw data. Has the customer visited the site? Is he a diamond member? Is he already buying products from another one of my partners, right? So there could be all these like sort of market basket analysis. Once you have that data prepared into features, which is right, just representations of the raw data in different ways, some which may be unique to like machine learning model, which for example, some models wouldn't accept text. So you wouldn't be able to say, oh, this customer is a diamond member or platinum member. The model needs to know either ones or zeros. So then you would have a column for like diamond, one column for platinum, and then you would fill those out with ones and zeros. So that's sort of what happens when you're doing feature engineering. The model gets trained. This happens through multiple iterative processes. You do it a few times, try different features, continue to figure out what the accuracy is going to be and test back on that prediction, whether yes or no it happened, right? So you would test the model on historical data. You would save some that the model will never see, and then you would test back against it. Once you have pretty good accuracy, then you start doing it on future data, or in places where you don't know if the customer is going to churn or not. And then this will help you then drive business action, right? So now if you know on Monday, I have the model running and I come in and it says, hey, this set of customers are going to churn within the next 30 days. Then now as a marketer, you can take action and see, okay, I can now use this list, which I can then use my segmentation on top of it and then run some specific set of campaigns. So I can run this specific set of ads, or I could do this specific set of promotions to try to get that customer to not churn within the next 30 days. And so at a high level, this is how data science works. And the cool thing is that the raw data could then be used for something else, right? So now if you have a personalization task, you could use all the exact same data, use different set of features, and then have a different model that says, hey, could you help me divide this customer database into 4 segments and then help me optimize those segments? Because maybe right now I'm only using 2, 3 variables to create those segments, but I could get a lot better and then use tens or hundreds of variables to create 5, 20, 100 segments to get really, really, really optimized, even down to the user level. So that's what's really cool about data science. Once you have the raw data, and it's really easy to play with it. And so if we go to the next slide, the thing that most people don't think about is that, yeah, there's all these cool ideas that you hear online of like, hey, if you do this, you get this much ROI. If you do this, this was how it's going to turn out on your ML investments. The reality is that only those that are strategically scaling their ML and AI initiatives are the ones that are getting a really strong return on those investments. What this means is that for the most part, a lot of users, when we asked at the beginning of this call was, hey, where are you in your ML journey, right? And this journey where you go from like, I'm learning, I'm exploring my first use case, I'm deploying my first use case, and then I'm scaling to more use cases. If you're not thinking about, hey, this is sort of like a long-term investment on like, I'm not just going to have one use case, but multiple use cases running on this data, then you're not truly going to get that higher ROI on your investments. And so if we go to the next slide, what ends up happening is that majority of organizations don't think about, hey, what is this long-term strategy, and being able to build a foundation for those scalable projects. And so what ends up happening is that among organizations that get started on this path, 62% of organizations never get to put one of those models in production, right? Sort of everything stays as a concept. Think of it like there was a meeting, we had a conversation, someone created a model, seemed like a good one, but it's not running in an automated manner, right? It's not generating automated insights. It's not generating automated actions. That's what means getting into production. And doing that is fairly challenging. And I'll show you why on the next slide. Well, what happened was what I showed you was like a very simplified way in which we think about data science and machine learning. This is just a slightly more complicated. It gets a little bit more complicated even than this. But at a high level, there's really 2 stages in this whole process. One is a data scientist or someone with some data science skills does some experimentation, which means you align to business objectives. You find the raw data that you need, right? So you go through all the different sources that you may have. put it in the shape of features that can be put into a machine learning model, train that machine learning model. And they're like, okay, this experiment worked. This data gave me, I don't know, 85% accuracy, which is really good, or 92% accuracy, right? Those things get defined as part of defining the business objective. And so then the question is, okay, how do I automate this whole process? How do I make this actually scalable? How do I make it so that I can drive business impact on a constant basis and get ROI on all these investments? Well, what ends up happening is that organizations end up having all sorts of data challenges in doing this. First, think of all the manual process that went into getting this raw data from all these different sources, right? Someone had to spend a lot of time figuring out the data, getting access, making sure that they could pull the data out into another environment in which then they could process it. And then once they process it, they had to send it to a machine learning model. Now they have to do it in production. Let's say you were doing it only with like, let's say you have 100 million customers. You did it with 10 million, right? Because you don't need to use all the data to do the training. But now every time you want to score your customer base on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, whatever makes more sense for your business, even on the minute basis, then you have to run a couple things, right? So now you have to load all the data into a single location, right? So you have to get all your data in one place. And then you have to scale the processing so that all those different calculations that you did on the raw data need to be recalculated so that then they could be sent to the train model to score the new data. What this means is that you can't just take the original raw data and send it to the train model. You have to put the data again in the same format that you use when you first train the model to then get new predictions, right? So you have to recalculate all your 7-day sum transactions, all your membership details, all that needs to be recalculated at a much, much, much larger scale. And this is where a lot of organizations start to have like breaking points where there's a lot of data corruption problems. Not all the data is making it into the model. You're not getting the same predictions that you were expecting during training. So now you're seeing like lower accuracy of the models. And it always ends up having to do, well, a lot of the times with the fact that the data wasn't properly loaded, cared for, and processed in order to take it into production, which is when you now finally get that business impact from machine learning models. And so it's really important to think about doing everything in a way that's scalable and governed, right? Because a lot of times we think of just systems that are managing all these customer data. And as more and more regulation comes in, we have to make sure that the data is being protected, right? We have to make sure that we preserve the privacy of that data. And so we don't want to be moving around data through a bunch of multiple systems. You want to put in a place like Snowflake that has all these security and governance features that ensure regulatory compliance as well as governance related things that may be part of your organization. And so, right, we talked about some of these challenges, which is how do you get access to that? And so when we think about Snowflake, yeah, next slide was good. Really, it's one, you get access to all the data. And when we mean access to all the data, and sort of Lorenzo already talked about this, is you get access to all the structures, right? We're moving in, we talked a little bit about DALI at the beginning. We're moving to a world where there's a lot more unstructured data, right? This is voice, images, and documents, right? That need to be translated or turned into fields that can be analyzed. And this also means having data that is not within your organization. In a lot of CPG retail use cases, there's a lot of data that exists among your partners. And so then how do you ensure that you have secure and private sharing in order to ensure the privacy of all the customer data that you may be using for those machine learning models, as well as data from the Snowflake marketplace, whether it's like economic data during the pandemic, the COVID vaccination was useful for retail to understand like sort of like foot traffic levels and sort of different purchasing patterns. So there's tons of third-party data sets that marketers can use to optimize all these personalization use cases. The second thing, like I mentioned, is you want to be able to do things at scale. So on the next slide, what we like to talk about is that with Snowflake, you don't really have to think about how am I doing this from a terms of like what is underneath from an infrastructure perspective. With Snowflake, it's really easy to get started, whether you want to use any language that you want, right? So if you have a team of analysts using SQL or you have expert data scientists that want to use Python, to really be able to leverage the Snowflake engine for any type of and scalable processing. So this could be any number of users, any number of data sets. And what happens is like Snowflake intelligently is going to scale out to meet your needs. So you don't never have to worry about infrastructure requirements or anything like that, right? So if you don't have a huge engineering team, or even just a couple engineers to support giving you all these environments where you can do all this processing, Snowflake's great because it completely abstracts a lot of this. And so you can really automate and scale all your pipelines. And the last thing that I wanted to mention on the next slide is that Snowflake is really great at integrating with a lot of tools that are there in the market. So let's say that you don't want to write SQL, you don't want to write Python. Maybe you want to use a platform that is more GUI friendly, meaning that it's a lot of click and drop so that you can do your analysis. You can use things like Alteryx, Dataiku, Data Robot on top of Snowflake. And all of those have deep integrations where you're using the interface from those platforms, but then you're using the Snowflake compute underneath to do all the processing, right? So we support both the expert data scientists, those that want to write code and want to use custom open source Python libraries, as well as those that are more like expert business analysts or just getting started as a data scientist and don't want to have to write as much code. And so we support the integration with either one of those, either platforms or open source frameworks that you can use. And the way we do this is by keeping the data stored in Snowflake and then enabling those platforms to push down the compute in Snowflake. What this means is that the data is not being copied into the other platform. Even though you're working from a different interface, all that you're doing is pushing down all the compute logic into Snowflake. So it really keeps your data secure and governed. Again, to continue to enhance that privacy preserving strategy your organization may have in order to make sure they meet regulatory and compliance around anything related to PII and all those things that are super important in marketing. And so if we go to the next slide, now what I want to talk to you about is, okay, how does this actually happen in practice? And so something that we're super proud at Snowflake is the fact that, hey, what we talk about, we actually use it. And so I'm going to talk about a lead scoring use case that we have here at Snowflake. So our data science team here at Snowflake, and so this is a project from a single data scientist. They were able to take data from multiple sources, and this is just a few, and some of you may have this in your stack, right? You have your CRM, Salesforce, email, all the forms in Marketo, paid social that happens through different social media platforms, display sales, which is where we use our sales development representatives use outreach and drift. And then of course we have a lot of like usage data that comes from the different cloud providers. And so it would be super cumbersome to try to go to each one of those every time you want to do an analysis. Rather, we bring in all that data into our own internal Snowflake deployment, which is called Snowhouse. And we map all these data into a single data set using Python and dbt, right? So we have data scientists that use code. If you don't have data scientists that use code, then you'll be able to use another tool on top of Snowflake. But in the end, you have all your data in one place so that you can then do a lot of experiments. In this case, for the lead scoring, which if we go to the next slide, it would help us move from a completely sort of like assigning manually values to leads and prioritizing that way to a more automated approach using predictive analytics. So in the previous state, the way we were doing lead scoring or lead prioritization was, right, we would get some data from Marketo, people that fill out forms, watch the webinar, something like that. We'll go into a Salesforce campaign, and then we would help prioritize maybe, right, we had some business rules like if attended more than 2 of these campaigns, then prioritize on outreach, right? Very simple manually logic. Now, once we have all this data and we're using machine learning model to generate, how do we prioritize each one of those leads? Then we're automatically creating this workflow where it's like populating data, scoring the model, scoring the new lead, creating this prediction that then is fed back into Salesforce and Marketo. And then that same scoring is then sent to outreach so that our SDR team can optimize how they spend their time, who they talk to, what they talk to them about. And then all of this metrics around it get tracked back on Tableau. So we bring the results from the models into Snowflake as well. So we have both the raw data and the model results next to each other so that we can continuously track both historical outputs, future outputs, and then compare what was realized and what wasn't realized to track different business metrics around that. And so it's really changed the way in which with our marketing team, or specifically our business development representatives or SDRs have been able to optimize their time doing lead outreach. And so we were super excited about how centralizing your data can do this. And we have tons of other use cases that if you go to our website, you can see what our marketing team has been able to do by bringing all the data together in one place.
Awesome. Thank you, Julian. That was great. And then I think one of the things that I always appreciate how Julian shows those slides about how to build a model is how it always starts with a business outcome in mind and how you have to start working backwards with that business goal in mind first. So that's super helpful. Yeah, I think as Julian mentioned, we usually, adopt our own technology and do things as exciting as the ones that, as Julian just mentioned. One of the other customers that we wanted to share with you today, that's been able to kind of implement some of the more advanced marketing use cases using data science and AI is Square. So wanted to balance out between a B2B customer, a B2B implementation, and a B2C one in this case. They did, a really few interesting use cases, two of which are shown here. But let's start with a high level view of the data that was used by Square. So they look at merchant characteristics, so things like business type, business size, number of locations, number of employees, geography, and so on. So and these can typically be some of the most predictive data sets for merchant behavior. It doesn't need to be something extraordinarily complex, right? These can be some of the most predictive items. The second piece, is they also look at merchant behavior itself. So things like payments behavior, product usage, exposure to other Square content, for example, through marketing campaigns. They aggregate that as well. And then when they don't have the data, they can also utilize external data sources to augment their understanding of the merchant. So you can imagine that being more critical in acquisition use cases or really early in the customer life cycle. And again, this point goes back to the slides that both I shared and Julian shared of that ecosystem of you having your first party data, then being able to bring in some of your partner data and ultimately some data sets, some data enrichment sets. That's critical if you don't have sufficient first party data to get really advanced models. Complement that with other data sets by sharing that data securely, and Snowflake allows you to do that. So let's start with one of the use cases that they implemented for performance marketing. Like most organizations, they typically what Square does is they deploy marketing spend across a variety of channels, right? And it's really important to get visibility into that return on investment of these campaigns and to better learn how they can optimize their spend across these channels. There are two parts to this. First, they needed to figure out which campaigns, in fact, that they launched were responsible for driving the most signups. And this is a typical marketing attribution problem. So many of you might be familiar with this. It's most common for sellers and merchants to view and interact with multiple touch points in campaigns. So really important to identify which ones are responsible for driving the most success and the most number of signups. And so they built a multi-touch attribution model to figure out which campaigns were responsible for that, right? For that success. Once they figured that part out and they figured out which campaigns were responsible for their success, the next part was to understand which campaigns drove the highest value sellers. So they used predictive analytics to create a model very early in the customer lifetime to calculate that particular customer's expected value, right? And this enabled Square to figure out exactly what the campaign ROI was, and also enabled them to make really nimble decisions to optimize campaigns and optimize spend across channels based on these findings. So by having that predictive ability to see what a customer may be worth over its lifetime, you can actually adjust your spend and accordingly based on that. And so they were able to do this successfully. Another use case is related to product recommendations. What this is essentially is a way to identify which products should be recommended to which sellers at each time as a way to maximize lifetime value, right? So Square has multiple products and they built a product propensity model or various product propensity models, I should say, across their suite of business tools. Again, using data science and machine learning algorithms to both predict probability to adopt and then predict the value given that adoption. And this takes into account a significant amount of historical data, as well as thousands of internal and external seller signals. And so with this use case, Square was it still is able to increase product awareness by more effectively targeting customers and prospects, as well as maximize product attachment and revenue. And so this is just another example of where, product propensity models using data and AI, machine learning, and data science and machine learning really was able to help Square improve their profitability and their revenue. And so this is, I think is another great example. We have tons of examples on our website, as Julian mentioned, of customers that have implemented this type of marketing use case and that have done a really good job of kind of using the data cloud as well as the data science capabilities in there, using our ecosystem, harnessing their own first party data, but complementing it with third party data and second party data, and to really drive some value for themselves in some of these marketing use cases. And with that, I believe, Paul, this brings us to the end of the presentation. So
All
I'll
right.
hand it back over to you.
That was
Give it a-
awesome. I don't know how many people on here have sat through like data science, machine learning training before, but Julian, that was really good. Like I've taken machine learning courses on Coursera, but to see it kind of share, it was a very good introductory thing for people. So that was awesome.
That's great to hear.
Let's go for some rapid fire questions. I've got a bunch. There's some coming in through the chat. If you've got questions, go ahead and put them in. But let me start with a quick definitions game. Data lake versus data warehouse versus data cloud. Just how should people think about those things? Are they the same? Are they complementary? What are they?
Yeah,
Julian, go for it.
I was gonna say the data lake and data warehouse are sort of like historic constructs of how people used to store and organize data.
Okay.
Data lake was super flexible on one end, so you could put anything in there, right? Which is became super popular as like unstructured data came in, images, video files, all that stuff. Everyone's like, let's just dump it in one place so you can access it. So think of it like an endless drive where you can put anything that you could imagine.
Okay.
The data warehouse was a construct that was structured, right? Everything had to be in tables, so rows and columns.
Okay.
But it made it really easy to access. So pretty much all dashboards in a company were always built on top of a data warehouse. That was sort of how things took about it. Snowflake's not either one. It's those two plus, because there's so much stuff that you can do in there, right? You get the flexibility of the data lake. You get even better performance than any data warehouse out there, whether on-prem or on the cloud. And we even have this new thing called hybrid tables, which enables users to also have something even a little bit more different, which is like NoSQL databases that allow for like super rapid response between an application layer and Snowflake. So there's all this foundational functionality on how you can store, structure, and process data in an environment that makes it really easy for you to do it with any amount of data, any type of data, and for any amount of users. And so, yes, if you use a data lake or a data warehouse, you'll get stuck in some constructs that sort of fit the world before us. But Snowflake was built in the cloud with all these new things in mind to break those barriers and be more than just a data lake or a data warehouse, so that it could support endless number of workloads and users and all that stuff in the cloud.
I'll just add one quick thing to that, because I know this is rapid fire. Some of these use cases do depend on both of those capabilities. You're getting deep historical data. We also want that fresh structured data that Julian talked about that lives in the warehouse. So you can imagine in a place that, unlike Snowflake, where you have everything in one place, how that can add a layer of complexity as you're trying to get some of these use cases up and running.
Okay, cool. Okay, we got Jennifer. It looks like Julian, you might have answered this one, but I don't know if she saw it. So we had a question about a small financial organization expanding rapidly. How can Snowflake support that growth? And in a semi-related question, maybe you can answer these together. If if someone doesn't have a data science team, can they achieve these kinds of things? Like, are they still a good fit for Snowflake at that very early stage where they're thinking about scaling up? So kind of like mashing together, what size organization does this holistic data strategy make sense for? At what stage in their company? And then this specific example of a fast growing financial services company.
Yeah, so on the fast growth, so Snowflake was literally made for fast growth. So one of the reasons a lot of customers move here, and a lot of what we call in our segment the cloud native, those that are companies born in the cloud, that are right. And so I sort of mentioned Coinbase, we talked about Square, there's DoorDash too. So we have a lot of these customers, and we have a whole program called Power By, which is if you're a customer building on top of Snowflake and you have this super growth, we're not just partners in like helping you build it, we're also partners in helping you sell it. So we have a go-to-market arm to help organizations that also are thinking of, hey, how could Snowflake help me enter some of these markets that we're already present in? So totally recommend the Power By program for super large growth cloud native companies or organizations building applications using Snowflake within their organizations. So that's one. And of course, would totally recommend you read about like usage-based billing, elastic scaling, all that stuff that sort of ends up mattering and making sure that your cogs align with your ROI. The other piece is going to be around, is this for someone that doesn't have a data scientist? I would say yes, you can get started without a data scientist. For the most part, you have at least one person that knows how to use SQL, and so then that'll get you started. I'll definitely say if you want to take advantage of like the leading edge of personalization and automating things and really building applications, then you have to make the journey towards hiring a data engineer, a data scientist, and some of these other roles. And I think one of the resources we'll share after this is there's a I, I I helped draft something called the Dummies Guide for Data Science in the Cloud. And so this is a really good walkthrough of like, hey, what does it mean to do data science? At the end, there's like 6 steps to get started. And I give you an idea of like some of the things that you'll need to do to get started. But yeah, I think eventually it makes sense that you'd want to have a data scientist, but you first need to have a data foundation. You don't want to come have a data scientist come in and play with Excel because I'm sure you have enough people that could do that. You want to enable them to do a lot more and manage larger data sets and all that stuff.
That's great. All right, Lorenzo, you had mentioned, I think the example that everyone probably was nodding their head to, seeing the ad when I've already bought the thing. We all have that. And you mentioned identifiers within that process. So talk to us for a moment about what is an identifier in case people aren't aware of the ID attached to them. And how does this solve for that identity resolution with this idea of the data cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul, because I think, when you talk about bringing all this data together and having that customer 360, a key element of that is identity, is really understanding who it is you're talking about and getting together an email and maybe a couple disparate emails that are attached to this person. That requires an identity spine for you to understand that you're reaching out to the same person and really targeting the same unique person in this case. I think what makes our approach at Snowflake so unique is typically you are asked to export your data out, apply it to the application of your choice, your identity application of your choice, for whatever identity resolution you need, which would sacrifice that data governance and privacy and dealing with the latency again, because you're transferring that data over externally. It needs to be treated, then they'd get back to you on your identification, then you can continue your campaign. Instead with Snowflake, is the applications are being embedded directly into Snowflake. So you don't have to sacrifice any of that. Instead of your data moving to the application externally, and again, sacrificing everything we just talked about, your application is actually moving to your data. And that's kind of one of the important things of the data cloud. You can work with any of your identity providers, most of which are directly in Snowflake, right? And so the big step change is bringing your application of your choice to your data as opposed to exporting that data out, right? And that's a massive kind of, I think, important thing to land with this presentation today about that data cloud is that applies for identity resolution, that applies for tons of these data enrichment sets that, Julian and I mentioned that if you don't feel like you have enough first party data, you can bring in third party data sets from the marketplace directly to your data. None of this requires your data to be moved or copied, right? Or which again, remove some of that latency and some of that scenarios that we talked about.
Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour, so why don't we wrap with one final thought from each end, knowing again our audience is at that initial stage in many cases, or just starting those first couple projects. What advice would you have for them of next steps to take?
My advice is, as Lorenz mentioned, this is a journey. It's not a clear line journey, but the most important thing is never forget that data is the foundation to everything that you want to do later, whether it's starting with some basic analytics, all going all the way to data science and machine learning. So make sure that you have a strong data strategy, both from like data you're capturing and storing, as well as third-party data that you want to bring over. And then everything will be a lot easier to do. Then you can hire data scientists, then you can get actionable insights, then you can do a lot more stuff. So don't forget the data in your journey.
It's great advice. And that's certainly one that I can echo as well. But I would say also, and I get asked the questions a lot when we talk about data science specifically, is how do these two worlds work together, marketing and data science? It all unites back at the point, this is why I stressed this earlier that Julian presented, of starting with the business outcome in mind and working backwards with that, right? So besides having the data as your foundation that Julian mentioned, start with very concrete things that you're trying to accomplish. And then also be kind of comfortable with iterations. Again, that journey, that slide that I shared with the maturity curve, it rarely is that clean, and it probably shouldn't be, right? You should be learning things along the way and fixing it and adjusting it as you go along. So be flexible as well.
Awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate the time. I think this has been great. Hopefully everybody got a ton of value out of this. We will send everything to everyone tomorrow. We'll do a write-up of this and summarize key points for it. So again, thank you both for doing this, and thank you to everybody who attended today. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
guys.
Paul. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.